Hello everybody, Black Fate here with the third video in the optimal animation video series for Vermintide 2. Today we'll be covering Kerillian and we're going to start with her dual daggers. So there's a few quirks here. First of all, the push and the push stab only take one stamina, just like the other daggers. And we'll reference the armory mod real quick for the next couple. Your light attack pattern has extra crit, and it applies a bleed dot to enemies, so you can see initial damage is pretty low, but then there's that bleed dot for 4.25 times 4. So you actually do a good amount of damage with one hit on a single target, just the bleed dot will only apply to the first target hit, not the second target. And the push stab, this stab also applies a bleed dot, and it can apply the bleed dot to armor. It's only mildly useful, however, because you see the bleed dot, the damage is cut in half roughly. Now, for animations, for hordes, it's pretty straightforward, just light attack spam. You're going to want to dodge dance because you're going to end up hit trading a lot. You don't have very much cleave or reach, so you're going to not stagger as much as you think you might with your attack speed, but because of your bleed dot, you actually can do good damage to hordes. You just have to be patient. So attack everything once approximately, let the bleed dot do its work, give up ground, and eventually everything will die. Now for armor, pretty straightforward, just charge attack, go for headshots, you do a lot more damage on headshots. I like to jump when I go for headshots. You also can throw a push stab at the beginning, like on a storm vermin or so, and that'll do a little bit extra damage, because technically the push stab will do 1.5 plus this bleed tick of 2 times 4, so technically 9.5 damage minimum, which is pretty good for a fast push stab, but it's not necessary because the charge attacks are so powerful. And then for bosses, because we're doing Kerillian, I'm going to have two little parts. One is for just normal boss damage. The second is what attack to use with Shade Alt, because that's, I think, important. And for some weapons, it's not that intuitive. But for bosses, it's also charge attack spam. If you want to be cheeky, you can throw a light in there and then do a few charge attacks. And then get another light in there. And that's just to keep the bleed dot ticking on the boss. It will do a little bit more damage than just charge spam, but it's not necessarily worth it if you're under pressure and you don't want to practice doing that. And with Shade Alt, pretty obvious. You just want to use the most powerful attack, which is the charge attacks. I tend to use the first one just because it's easier to get to, but also getting headshots is often pretty easy with the first charge attack. We're going to move on to dual swords, which are absolute crap right now, but we'll cover them. The main quirk is your light 3 and 4. Once again, we'll reference the army mod. Light 3 and 4 have a lot of extra crit chance, to the point where you can basically guarantee a crit every couple light attack rotations, which means maintaining swift slaying is pretty good. You also can get good value out of resourceful combatant. But otherwise, there's nothing special about the dual swords. So we'll jump straight into animations. And for hordes, pretty straightforward, just light attack spam. If you're under pressure, you can push, but don't push stab because it's an actual stab. The stab doesn't give you any good cleave or anything to control hordes, so it's, I think, a waste of time. Just push and go straight into light spam, and use the full light attack pattern. Don't be afraid to keep light attacking. You'll get those guaranteed crits, basically. Not quite guaranteed, but close to guaranteed crits. Now for armor, this is where it gets tricky because dual swords are absolutely terrible against armor. You can see the charge attacks are essentially 2 lights, and their base damage against armor is really low. If you get headshots, you do decent-ish damage, but it's overall going to be really low. The push stab does some armor damage, and so what I like to do against storm vermin is usually push stab into charge 1 on repeat. And why? Because the push stab doesn't do that much less damage than both charge attack, or the charge attack, because on base body shots, if you don't get a crit or anything, it's 7, whereas the push stab, if it's not a crit body shot, does 5.75, so it's not that much worse, and it's faster. And it gets you straight into that first charge attack, which is the X attack, whereas the second one is the double horizontal slash. I like the X charge attack because it's easier to get headshots. So if you're trying to min-max, push stab into charge 1, going for headshots. It's not very good, but it's something. Now for bosses, if you're not Shade and you're just trying to do normal boss DPS, light spam is by far the best. But if you are Shade, use charge attack. I like charge 1 better just because, once again, it's easier to get headshots. Another note is with Shade in charge 1, you actually can hit 2 targets with Shade ult damage, and it's enough to kill 2 Chaos Warriors, so it's actually pretty potent. This double slash attack. Technically, dual daggers can hit 2 targets with both the stabs, but it's a lot harder to line that up properly. It's actually pretty easy. The spacing around this is actually really good for that. You want to hit like at the beginning of your animations, not at the end. So if they're too close, it actually is a lot harder to get that double Shade kill. But if they're spaced more like this, it's very doable. Now we'll move on to the last dual weapon for Kerillian, the Sword and Dagger. So all these dual wield weapons, the dual daggers, dual swords, and sword and dagger, they're all kind of similar in that they have good dodge numbers, higher crit chance, and low damage but really good attack speed, and that kind of makes up for it, so they end up having pretty good damage. Sword and Dagger, first quirk is it has the push stab cost of a dagger, and once again reference Armory mod. Has extra crit chance on everything, and the third light is a dagger light, and it applies a bleed dot, the same bleed dot. So you see 1, 2, 3, use your left hand on that third attack, and that's the dagger attack. It's pretty straightforward, the animations you want to use. For hordes, just light spam. Once again, the push stab is an actual stab, so it's not useful in and of itself to control hordes, but maybe a push every now and then. You can spam them because it only costs 1 stamina. But light spam is pretty good. Its damage is kind of low, but you have better crit chance, easy to proc swift slaying, and it's easy, like headshot damage is pretty good, crit multiplier is pretty good. So you actually do more damage than you think, and the first 2 lights especially have really good cleave, so you actually do good control. I think even though the damage potential is lower than dual dagger light spam, it feels safer than dual dagger light spam. For armor, there's 2 main things, either charge spam, and you see their second charge attack is that overhead, and that's really powerful. You want to get a lot of value with that, trying to get headshots. Or you can push stab that goes straight into charge 2. And against shielded storm vermin, this push stab into charge 2 is really powerful. Against Chaos Warriors, I'll often do that also just because the first charge attack, it's really hard to get a headshot on Chaos Warriors with that first charge attack, so I'll often just speed up the process and kind of jump for those headshots on Chaos Warriors. One tip about that is if you hold left click, keep messing up, hold left click, you go straight into charge 2 after push stab. Then for bosses, charge spam is the best DPS, but for Shade, there's a couple things. Charge 2 does better DPS against bosses with Shade ult than charge 1. However, if you have 2 Chaos Warriors or something, you can pop both of them with a Shade ult using charge 1. So for single target boss damage, charge 2 is the best with Shade ult. For popping armor, Chaos Warriors, charge 1 works just fine. In fact, you can hit 2 entities with it. Now we'll move on to the two-handed weapons. We'll start with Spear. So this is a pretty fun one. There's some interesting animations you can do. The first thing to note is that you actually can move faster than base walk speed if you spam charge attacks. If you hold them too long, it doesn't work. Right? You have to basically take as small of time as possible without doing a light attack with your charge attacks, and you're like just faster than base walk speed. Now for hordes, you're going to want to light spam for DPS. However, if you need control, then you do push stab, light, light. And you see 2 of those 3 attacks is that horizontal swipe, and it's a left-handed swipe. And so that makes this a very left-handed or left-side dominant weapon, which means you got to be careful with your positioning. So if there's stuff on the right, you might not actually hit it. It's like even if it's right here, you might not hit it. So you got to be careful, position yourself on the left side of your team. So if there is something right here, your teammate over here will end up getting it while you're dealing with most of the stuff more to the left. You're going to suffer if you're on the right side, because if you're on the right side of the formation, the stuff off to this side, you kind of have to look at it to actually kill it, and then you're not looking right here where you might get got by something that your teammate's not really picking up because they're more focused on the center. So spacing is kind of awkward with a left-handed weapon or a right-handed weapon. Now the other interesting thing is that your stabbing lights will do full damage to 2 targets, which is pretty powerful. You can actually end up getting a Fanatic breakpoint and kill 2 Fanatics with 1 light attack, which makes your light spam by far the best DPS. However, as I said, control can be an issue, so use your push stab, light. For armor, 2 options, either light into charge attack or light into charge attack. Now whether or not I use 1 light or 2 depends on what I'm facing usually, and the spacing and how comfortable I feel. If I'll use 2 lights against Storm Vermin, because lights do good damage if it's headshots or crits, and it's a lot easier to get headshots on Storm Vermin, so I'll do light, charge, going for headshots and everything. And then against Chaos Warriors, I think charge attack is a little bit more valuable because it's easier to get headshots with that, so I'll go 1 light into charge attack. And just try to make that charge attack count. Now, for bosses, just real quick, with Shade Alt, you want to use charge 2. It's really obvious. So light into charge attack gets you charge 2. Charge 1, by the way, is a more powerful swipe. It's just slow, so I don't really use it ever. But for normal boss DPS, if you're not Shade or if you're between Shade Alts, light spam is actually the best. Why? Because these stabbing lights are by far the most efficient boss DPS. In fact, you don't even want to do light, charge. Just do light spam. It's okay to suffer from light 3 than any extra value you get out of using charge 2. So for bosses, just light spam. Then we'll go to, let's do two-handed sword. So this is also kind of interesting. There's some quirks. First of all, once again with the armory mod, we can see the extra crit chance on the push stab. It's actually a significant amount of extra crit chance, so I like using that mostly just to get Swift Slaying procced. But the big thing is your charge attack, your charge 1, you can hold forever, and it's this powerful stab. And you might notice that you actually have a movement speed buff while you use it, and then right after, in the backswing, you have a huge slowdown period. So to avoid that, I use a block. I block just immediately after, and it kind of resets that your movement speed to block speed, and you negate that slow period, which is actually useful because you can travel faster than base walk speed by a little bit. And you actually can do it even faster if you have Swift Slaying procced. Now for hordes, it's pretty easy, just light spam. Use the push stab, it has extra crit, gives you control. These attacks are not very good because they're a low to high animation instead of like a high to low diagonal, which means getting headshots is really difficult, especially on Chaos Hordes. So be careful about that. You don't actually have as good of DPS as you might think, just because the animations aren't as nice. Against Skaven, it's perfectly fine. I think you do suffer against Chaos. For armor, pretty obvious, you use this charge attack. Definitely go for headshots. It does like almost double or more than double damage. You can actually get to a one-shot Storm Vermin breakpoint with a couple things. I'm not going to go into that, but it's possible and it's pretty useful. Don't be afraid to be patient because you can hold this forever. So if you want to line up that headshot, don't be afraid to hold it. Now for Shade Alt, of course, use this on everything. And then for bosses, also just spam charge 1. Now you don't need to block to spam it, but I like to just for that movement speed thing. And it's a little safer if something ends up attacking you between attacks. You instinctively block anyways, so it's better, I think. And I don't think it's any slower. So for bosses, it's a little awkward, but it's definitely the best DPS. Now for Glaive, the final two-handed weapon. So Elf's two-handed weapons are similar in that they all have lower dodge stats and or mobility compared to the other weapons, but they have better damage usually. Although their dodge numbers are about the same as a lot of other one-handers for other characters, so they're all pretty good. Now the Glaive is a bit of a powerhouse in its armor damage, and the reason why is because this charge attack, it's like a swipe up and then a overhead, an uppercut and overhead strike. Now you charge the overhead and you just tap left to do the overhead, or you charge the uppercut rather, tap left to do the overhead. And the thing is, you can't really block during those. It's either you block and you don't do an overhead, or as soon as you press left click, you can't block until after it's done, which is pretty annoying. It can leave you vulnerable. So what people sometimes do is they'll like look away for the charge and then turn onto the target they're trying to hit with that overhead, just because it's safer than trying to do this right up next to a target and you can't block till after. Now for hordes, you just light spam, use push stab. You got really good damage. It's a little slow, but you got good cleave, good damage, so it works. Push stab for control. For armor, for DPS against armor, charge spam, or just hit that second one if you don't want to put yourself in too much peril with holding charge 1 in front of an enemy while you can't block or dodge really. But if you're under a lot of pressure, you can light spam and do a little bit of damage, but more importantly this has a lot of stagger against armor, so you can pretty easily regain control of the situation, and once you feel comfortable, go to charge spam for DPS. Now for bosses, this is a little complicated. So for just normal boss DPS, light spam is actually the best. Not by much, but it's a little bit better than charge spam. It's actually, both of them are pretty bad compared to a lot of other weapons for boss damage. Now for shade ult, now honestly you shouldn't be using shade or glaive with shade, it's terrible. But if you are using it, then for unarmored targets, charge 1 does more damage with shade ult, whereas for armored targets, the overhead charge attack does more damage. So if you're trying to kill a boss, shade ult the first charge attack. If you're trying to pop a chaos warrior, use the second charge attack. The thing is, even the second charge attack won't guarantee a kill on a chaos warrior like from the front to the body. You have to get a headshot or a backstab or build up some extra crit power or power versus stuff to actually get that chaos warrior one-shot breakpoint, which is kind of pathetic considering how much damage the glaive does normally, that it's so bad with shade ult. But we'll move on to the one-handed weapons. We'll do sword first. I have a red one. So sword's kind of fun. Its main quirk, let's see, is it has extra crit chance on its heavies for kind of some random reason, but also it has basically infinite dodge count, which is pretty powerful. Like even the dual wield weapons only have 6, which is like considered high for most weapons. So both the one-handed weapons for elves have a high effective dodge count, which is kind of the trademark of elves' one-handed weapons. They have lower damage, but basically infinite dodges, and good mobility outside of that. Now for hordes, you just light spam. You see their third light is this stab. It's kind of the same stab that's the like push stab on some of the dual wield weapons. It does a little bit of armor damage. So if you do have some mixed hordes and armor, maybe get that stab to actually hit the armor, but otherwise this is pretty good. Push stab for control if you're under pressure. One thing you can do is do 2 lights and then do charge, light, charge, light. It's lower DPS, but it gives you a little bit more stagger, so if there's like a berserker or like a mauler in front of you and you want to stagger it, after light 2 you can do charge 2 and repeat this forever. It's not really that good, I don't think, but if you do have a situation where you're going to prefer that stagger and that moment over the damage, and you can't dodge for some reason, or you can't block, then use it. For armor though, I think you have 3 fairly valid options. The first is just charge spam. You have extra crit chance on all these attacks, but you might notice that only 2 of the 3 are overheads, and you get a lot more damage as a base on the overheads than charge 2. On a crit it does 14, without a crit only 7.75, like less than half the other ones, so you really want to get those overheads, and to do that you can either charge, block, reset on repeat. This is not bad, especially against chaos warriors. You also kind of are blocking in between attacks, so you're adding a layer of safety. But the other thing you can do is charge light on repeat. This is pretty good. I'd recommend getting good at this. Really good against storm vermin, especially if you get double headshot. I think it's a little bit worse on chaos warriors because it's hard to get good value out of that stab, but you still get your charge 1 pretty fast, so it's useful. And then against shielded storm vermin, what I often do is push stab, and then do 2 charge attacks, and it goes charge 3 into charge 1, so you get double overheads. And the double push means you open the guard. So again, shielded storm vermin, that's a very specific combo I use. That's a little bit different than the others. Now against bosses, charge light is actually the best DPS. Better than charge spam, better than light spam by a little bit. And with Shade Alt, of course, just use charge 1. Not that complicated. It's actually really bad damage for Shade Alt. I wouldn't recommend using Sword with Shade. Moving on to the final weapon, the DLC weapon for Kerillian, the Elven Axe. It's pretty similar to the other axes, both Salties and Bardens, but it has a different animation pattern. The damage model is exactly the same, and it has infinite dodges, but no crit chance. Those are the main differences. The animation pattern you see has these two like vertical attacks, an overhead and an uppercut in the middle of the attack pattern, which is pretty annoying. So when you're dealing with hordes, you can just light spam, but what I often will do is push stab light so that you don't have to like aim as much, because if you're aiming right here, you see your two middle attacks here will miss the target right next to you. So if you're trying to like, hit him, then if you do push stab light, you get two horizontal attacks with a push before, so you can regain control with that. Now the other thing you can do for armor specifically is charge light spam, and you can repeat this. You don't have to block reset, and it's 2 overheads, 1 charge attack, 1 light. It's pretty powerful, especially on Chaos Warriors. You can 2-tap Storm Vermin with 2 headshots. So that's pretty nice. With Shade Alt, use charge attack. Once again, it actually is pretty bad with Shade and doesn't kill a Chaos Warrior unless you get a headshot or a backstab or build for it. So it's pretty bad. I would not recommend using it unless you're kind of memeing. And then for bosses, just light spam as usual. And that's it. Thank you for watching.